Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my co-MC, Rach. Hey, Rach, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I am super hyped to do a topic episode. It's been a while, right?
It has been too long, but we've got a very interesting topic to talk about today. So today's topic is pretty timely. Powered by the apocalypse during the times of social and physical distancing.
The world we're recording this episode in is pretty different from the world we recorded our last few episodes in, given that the world is now dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we go any further, I'd like to issue a small content warning that we're going to be discussing the pandemic and its impact on society throughout this episode. It's the main topic. If you find that troubling, you may want to skip this episode. The situation around the world is rapidly changing. I think it's important to note that we're recording this episode in mid-April. At this point, I don't think either of us know what the situation is going to look like, even when this episode releases. So hopefully it'll all be useful information, but we can't predict the future. I guess a quick check-in is in order. Rich, how are you holding up in this new apocalypse world?
Oh, that hurts because of the truth. I'm doing okay. I'm a little bit of a homebody, so I don't mind spending time inside and online. My 14-year-old son and I have been going out on daily walks with our little Chihuahua Beaker, which has actually been pretty nice and a change for us. When I go out to shop for groceries or pick up food or medicine, it's a little nerve-wracking. I try to keep just me being the only person who really goes out and has to deal with the public. I'm really blessed that I can fully work from home without any problems or hang-ups. My boss has been really great about that. In fact, my entire company is working from home right now. Very thankful for that. What about you, Rach?
Well, I'm certainly grateful that you get to stay at home because I do appreciate when companies are allowing people to work from home in these trying times. Life for me has shifted a little bit. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada, and our situation is okay, for lack of any better word. I can't work remotely because I'm a frontline worker, although this crisis has made me less frontline than I used to be. A lot of my job now is keeping pharmacy supply chains running in the background so my existing patients stay healthy during the pandemic. I'm not sure how well known the Toronto situation is on a global scale, so let me give you some examples that do tie back to what our show is all about. The most dramatic thing I've experienced is we now have police on horseback who chase people off of our neighborhood beaches. That's terrifying, right? They're probably a gang attached to a warlord. Related to that, the strangest thing I've experienced is our mayor was in self-isolation early in the pandemic. He still needed to give daily updates to the city, so he would live stream onto a monitor in a dark press room in City Hall. So there's your warlord threat, probably a dictator, impulse to control with a gang on horseback. Feel free to steal this for your next upcoming Apocalypse World game.
Good one, Rach.
Speaking of your next game, as we established, there's something wrong with the world. We know what it is, and we have some tools to deal with it. One of those tools is what's known as social distancing or physical distancing. Both terms mean the same thing. To pull from the Government of Canada's website, physical distancing involves avoiding crowded spaces and gatherings, avoiding common greetings such as handshakes, limiting contact with people at higher risk, keeping a distance of at least 2 arm lengths apart, approximately 2 meters from others, as much as possible. And it encourages people to stay at home as much as possible, including for meals and entertainment. As you can imagine, these recommendations make face-to-face tabletop gaming pretty challenging and disrupt any convention gaming in the near future.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think Origins is canceled at this point. Gen Con, I would be really shocked if it's not canceled within the next few weeks. DexCon, I think they've released a statement that they're waiting to hear from the hotel to cancel. I don't think we're going to see any gaming conventions until 2021 at this rate.
No meat space ones. No, I don't think so.
Lots of online ones, though.
Indeed. In fact, as we record this, the Gauntlet Open Gaming Weekend is going on right now.
To put my medical professional hat on for a second, I empathize that some listeners are going to consider creative ways to play face to face games with people from outside of their household that technically invoke social or physical distancing. For the safety of everyone, do not do this. Uh, I believe Jacqueline Burke said something on Twitter along the lines of, COVID is not the Fae. You can't outsmart COVID like one would outsmart the Fae. You need to maintain social distancing and follow all the rules to help protect everyone.
Right.
Instead, let's use our creativity to get in some PbtA action while maintaining physical distancing and flattening the curve. So, Rich, how can we play Powered by the Apocalypse while also being physically distant?
Megaphones. We all get megaphones. We go to a park and we call out our actions and interactions as loudly as possible, at least
True
2 meters away from each other. Yeah.
True story time. There was once a convention where one of the convention organizers gave me a megaphone and I got to run around with it for a while. And then there was a button that said siren, and he said, I wonder what this does. And then set it off in the middle of the convention hall. It was very upsetting, but also hilarious.
That's great. That's great. There are 2 routes to consider for Powered by the Apocalypse gaming while physical distancing: playing with the people in your household or playing with people online over the internet. Within those 2 options, there's some variations to consider, to explore, each with their own learning curve, as well as pros and cons. We are not experts, but I think you and I, Rach, we can talk a little bit about our experiences. Not all Powered by the Apocalypse games are identical. There are a lot of common traits that are shared across those games, and that's what we'll generally speak to. We can give some points to consider for adapting games to a new format. And you might find that you'll need to experiment a little bit to make the change work for you and whoever else is playing with you. That's totally cool. You've bought the
Yeah.
game, you have a copy of it, it's in your hands. No one can come and find you now.
Well, unless you record it on YouTube and then post it as an actual play example, and then they will hunt you down.
Indeed, indeed. There will be so many people adding you for that one little tweak that you made. No, it's okay.
So, an opening thought before we go into all the different variations of physically distancing while gaming. Say you have an existing campaign and you want to continue it, or you want to continue at least playing with those players. So, Rich, should you transition your game into an online game, or instead just start up a new game and start fresh? Given, if we're experimenting with a new way to play, we might as well leave the past behind and jump in.
So I'm going to steal a little bit of this answer from Jamila Najati's answer that they gave during an upcoming episode of the Gauntlet podcast. It's a great answer, and that's why I'm stealing it and giving credit. You really do want to go with a new game, and here's why. There is so much that changes between a meat space or face-to-face game to an online game that people clinging to those characters that they've played or those storylines that they've told or particular aspects of how they had the table laid out, all that stuff is going to be really, really difficult. I actually have an example. I had run a game session of not Powered by the Apocalypse, but Hit the Streets, my little street vigilante supers game. And I ran it at a friend's house here in Minneapolis in February. And then our soft apocalypse came and we tried to play this week. And there was so much different. Like he had to take a picture with his camera phone of the map, and I had to reconstruct people's characters from what little bits that I had just kind of scribbled down to notes. So much time had passed that it was really challenging. We spent over half of the game session just trying to spin back up into what we had established in the past. And that really was a lot of wasted effort. Like, it was fun, but if we'd started fresh, we could have had new ideas working within the new medium, which would be the online play, utilizing those online tools such as a character keeper and the like, that would have facilitated play in that medium much better than trying to replicate it online.
That's an interesting sort of set of circumstances to take into account, especially when you have those expectations that were established for in-person play and then trying to translate it, because people are going to want it to be like it was basically.
Absolutely. Why not, right? That's what we're used to. So having that uphill battle of taking folks who may not normally play online and having them have to stare at screens and go to websites and find the die roller and know which buttons to click and all these other things that are the permutations of playing online while still trying to ape a physical table experience. It's just one too many hurdles. And I strongly recommend doing a new game. Now, if your group is just dead set on we love this world, maybe try a different system in the same setting, different characters in the same city, that kind of thing. So you can still keep that story connectivity, but you've got a little bit of distance from it so you can gloss over any of the little bits. But definitely go with something new. It really does work better, because I've also had a face-to-face group that I brought online, and we went with Apocalypse World when previously we were playing Forbidden Lands, and that was great because everything was new, even the system. So we all felt like we were on the same page, as it were.
I can even think of an example within our online game on a smaller scale where I needed to step away from the MC role. I was going to MC a campaign for Rich and some of our friends.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic happened, and I had to sit down with everyone and say, look, I was all keyed up to MC this game, and my responsibilities to the world have changed greatly over the past few weeks. I still want to play with you, but can we start fresh? Which resulted in Rich becoming the MC, or was it you're the Star
Space
Master?
Master.
Space Master? You should be the Star Master because it's a Star Wars impulse drive game.
Dang it, now I'm like, oh, Star Master is kind of awesome. But yes, if it were a straight up impulse drive game, I would be called the Space Master. Now I'm inclined to lean into the Star Master because of Star Wars setting that we're using.
It's
That's
very
right. I'm
70s,
running
very
yet
on
another
point.
Star Wars game. Ugh, what is up with me? I have a sickness.
It's amazing. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast too, when we get into online gaming spaces with Powered by the Apocalypse.
You bet.
But to start, let's talk a bit about in-person games. Now, you could still have in-person games with physical and social distancing, but they have to be with people within your household.
Mm-hmm.
So say you have a roommate or a partner you live with, and you're both into games, or you convert them into becoming into games. That sets up a perfect space to start duet gaming. Duet gaming is a term that's currently being used to describe games with one player and one MC. There's games that are designed from the ground up for this style of play. In the Powered by the Apocalypse realm, there's a couple of games like this, I think. I can think of Murderous Ghost. I'm not sure if there's any more. Do you know any, Rich?
Off the top of my head, specifically designed for duet gaming, I'm not aware of any. That said, in the show notes, I'll have a Twitter handle that you should follow. Robert Angus, member of the Gauntlet community, has this huge list on itch of all kinds of duet and solo games. And I believe there are some Powered by the Apocalypse games in there. So I will make sure and have a link to that in the show notes. As far as PbtA that I'm aware of that's specifically duet, Murderous Ghost is the only one that I'm aware of. And if you have some, feel free to leave us comments in the show notes. We'd love to add that in to our show notes for folks who come by and want to check it out.
Yeah, and going back to solo games, I don't know if there's many PbtA solo games.
Iron Sworn is absolutely a solo game. In fact, the Plus One Forward episode of Iron Sworn with the designer, Sean, he ran me through and had me effectively play solo out loud, and it was really cool.
My partner Rob suggested that the Doomed Pilgrim games might count, but his qualifier was it's a Vincent Baker game and there's probably moves. Does that make it a Powered by the Apocalypse game? To which he shrugged. So your mileage may vary there. Right now, to bring up the topic of my partner Rob, him and I are playing Monster of the Week as a duet game at the pace of about one session a week. I'm playing two-player characters in the game, which is the first time
Ooh,
we've done that in a duet game. We've shaken it up a lot. We've done campaigns where we're both playing and emceeing at the same time, switching those roles between scenes. And we've also done campaigns with one PC and one MC, which is more of the traditional way of playing a duet game.
nice. For me right now is Dungeon World. I'm running a duet game for my wife. This game started off as a play by post. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was originally a Monster Hearts game, and then it became an Urban Shadows game that was play by post. That at that point became a duet play by post. Then we brought that to live face to face. And then we shifted from Urban Shadows to Dungeon World, which we've been doing for about 9 months or so in Dungeon World. In fact, I ran some earlier tonight. What we do, we game a couple times a week, usually for about an hour to an hour and a half. So it's not what I would consider like a full session, but because we do it a couple times a week, we end up getting that weekly game feel and that amount of content through.
I want to come back to that in a little bit because I got some opinions on the length of duet games and how our expectations should shift.
Before we move on, I will speak a little bit about Urban Shadows. And this is less to talk about Urban Shadows itself as a game, but more about trying to find your way with your play partner in a
Mm-hmm.
duet game. So we moved from Monster Hearts to her character graduated high school. And so we said, hey, let's try this is Urban Shadows. And I found that my wife, Carrie, her playstyle, she really was not engaging in the faction level play. She wasn't interested in that. And so it effectively blunted advancement for her character. And then a lot of the deal cutting that is part and parcel of Urban Shadows, she seemed more tentative around that and less interested in really going for the throat with debts and pushing people to owe you and that kind of stuff. So I looked at it on its face. We were effectively playing kind of a more free-formy style game. And I felt dissatisfied because I'm like, well, if we're going to play a game, let's like play the game part of the game. We came up with a reason for her character to effectively travel to the land of the Fae because she was playing a Fae in Urban Shadows. And we just transitioned that character, and she brought a couple of her friends along from quote unquote the mortal realm or the real world and made it a Dungeon World game. And falling into those patterns like Dungeons and Dragons, she was much more interested, much more fulfilled. She got excited about that. She's now created an entire folder for her character where she's just so much more energized and excited about picking new moves. So it was the same character. We're still playing the duet game, but we found the game that worked for us. And that's just there's no reason that any one game's a monolith. Just figure out with your duet partner what are you all interested in playing. So that was my note that I wanted to throw in about the Urban Shadows game.
I think that's an excellent point because the expectations that both partners of a duet game have for that game should be transparent to make the game work best for both sides. I've had a lot of success playing duet Urban Shadows with Rob, but we both go in knowing we're going to play a trashy urban fantasy novel where Rachel's character is going to make a bunch of really bad deals with bad people, and we're going to see where that goes because that's the type of storytelling that Rob and I really lean into with urban fantasy. That we're both fans of the Dresden File books, which are kind of trashy urban fantasy. And then Rob's also a fan of Robert B. Parker's Spencer novels, which are basically the template for a lot of urban fantasy noir that's on the market right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, like one of the things we did early on in the pandemic is watch that new Spencer movie on Netflix. And then Rob described his frustration with, oh, I would not portray this character as this, or this character, I'm okay with this one. That dog is wrong. He's got some opinions. So let's talk about a couple of factors with Powered by the Apocalypse games in the context of duet games.
Okay.
What are things you should consider? First, as we've been alluding to with our discussion about expectations, what game are you playing? Obviously, very important topic. Certain games are going to fit the format of duet games more than others.
Hmm.
To give an example, Monster Hearts. Monster Hearts is a fantastic, wonderful game, in my opinion. Okay, my hot take on Monster Hearts, great game, not a great fit for a duet game. It's very thoughtful in making space for interactions between different players, and that's not going to shine really in a duet game environment. If both the MC and player want to bring Monster Hearts to the table in a duet game, you could do that, but you should consider the expectations and to adjust your expectations of what that game is going to be about. It may lean more Twilight than the fraught social tensions that Monster Hearts is marketed as.
Yeah, I could see that. I've played Monster Hearts duet over play by post, and the tone does shift because you don't have that get in the pit player versus player action that you see in a lot of Monster Hearts game, kind of the ones that you would most readily associate with how that game plays.
Yeah, those are the type of games I love to run with Monster Hearts. Like to get a bunch of players at each other's throats. It's always a good time for me. That's not really going to happen with one player.
Right.
But I could definitely see people who would enjoy the idea. Here's this teenage urban fantasy story, but it's about one person and their relationships to all these NPCs. That could be interesting. Not quite what the game is meant to do, though.
Nope.
I was going to bring up that games that have a party united against threats shine better in duet play than games where players are at odds with each other. But upon further reflection, I don't think that's necessarily true. Urban Shadows, as we were talking about earlier, is a game where the party is rarely united, but it does function well as a duet game. I think that has a lot to do with the solo rules in the back of the book. And if you
Mm-hmm.
lean hard into the politics of the deal making, that responds very well with NPCs. On the other hand, our success with Monster of the Week has been varying. It's really good when you get to the monster hunting part and you're getting all the weaknesses set up and you're trying to track the monster down. Oh, it's so good. But the investigation part seems to bog a bit for us, even with two PCs. I think it's really meant to have a bunch of minds working together at the table to piece together different ideas and figure out where to go, which is to say I'm not an intelligent person. I just think it needs like a lot of a sort of a brainstorming component that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of in character and kind of out of character at the same time that you don't get in a duet game.
Yeah, I can see that. I will say for Urban Shadows, which is funny because I talked about how Urban Shadows ended up not working for us. One of my main sticking points where I have had problems running Urban Shadows is when you run it for a group of people, there are a number of moves that expand those factions. And so you end up with this just giant Sears Roebuck catalog of NPCs. That isn't a problem with solo because you just have one player generating those characters for the factions. And so that's why I was like, let's try Urban Shadows. I think it'll work great solo. We have solo rules, and I feel like the thing that trips me up when I run Urban Shadows will be less of a problem. You were going to say something, Rage?
Yeah, I agree. When we played solo Urban Shadows or duet Urban Shadows, we started with the Scholar, who basically starts with a file folder of NPCs. Worked out great. I wish I had my notebook that I had for Urban Shadows here. I have a different notebook beside me right now, but I had to do maintenance. I had like a whole, I guess the best way to describe it is I had a whole page of my notebook full of all my debts, and I had to do maintenance on it to make sure everything was cleaned up. I had at one point, I was doing recaps of my Urban Shadow sessions on an old blog I had, and I would do these little tables at the end with all my debts because it was getting completely out of control. But a lot of fun in a solo duet game. Not so much if you're the MC who is trying to manage five people's, like, again, just catalogs of NPCs. It
Hmm.
becomes a bit of a pain in the butt, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And that in a duet game, that's fine, right? Even
Oh,
if it gets
totally.
unwieldy, it's unwieldy for like one player. So your monster of the week observation about investigations, that's really interesting. I actually find for my experience of monster of the week, even with a group, it shines with the monster hunting, but the investigation is more like an excuse to kind of do the noir thing of going around talking to people until someone with guns comes in and starts shooting, and then you fight the monster. That's been my general experience of Monster of the Week, even with
Yeah,
groups.
with groups, my take on the investigation stage is listen to really interesting ideas that they come up with, and suddenly that's now canon. And I quickly write them down in my notebook, and I'm like, cool, yes, that was always the case. You are so smart, player characters.
Well, the
But
die
there,
roll told us that it's true, so
yes, right.
bam.
There were definitely points where we were playing Monster of the Week as a duet game where we were both looking at each other going, okay, so how do we move the plot forward now? Which I think would have, there would have been more ideas being spurned off at the table if we had more players.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What's another factor that we should consider for duet games?
Keeping an eye out for mechanics that you're going to have to adjust because it's a duet game.
Hmm.
Because often in Powered by the Apocalypse game design space, there's mechanics that really want to encourage players to interact with other players. You need to be aware of where those exist and figure out with your player and your MC, depending on what side you're on, how you want to handle those. That is to say, if you want to engage with them at all, you may find it easier to leave those moves and mechanics out. Now, normally I don't encourage leaving mechanics out or changing them around, but these are unusual times.
Hmm.
For example, let's look at Masks. I think Masks has a lot of appeal as a duet game. I mean, that seems pretty cool. When I was writing these show notes, I wanted to turn to my partner, Rob, and say, hey, Rob, do you want to play a teenage superhero? I want to MC you being a teenage superhero.
How'd that go?
I didn't bring it up because he was busy writing his solo D&D notes. I didn't say he was doing that. So this is a secret. On the other hand, Masks has all these team mechanics there that I think they could still work, but you're going to have to be thoughtful about how those apply to the game.
Yeah, I think keep a close eye on any help mechanics for any Powered by the Apocalypse game. I found almost all of them are built for multiple players to be helping each other out, and that there's no caveat or no workaround for, well, if you have an NPC that's trying to help you out. So you're probably going to need to tweak that. For example, in the Dungeon World Duet game, after looking at a number of different ways to tweak bonds, I finally just said, hey, I'll just give you an XP instead of us stressing about your bonds. Every time that we go through the XP questions, I'll say, yes, you fulfilled one of your bonds. Let's move on. I got lazy. I'm a terrible person. I know I could have
It's
designed something better, but I just didn't.
I mean, it's okay if you need to make your game work at the table right now, as far as I'm considered. Again, no one's going to judge you unless you live stream it onto YouTube, and then everyone will make fun of you, and those people suck anyway.
Exactly.
Now, you may find in the odd case that when you look at these mechanics, a game might just not work at all for a duet game. The one I could think of was Bluebeard's Bride. Okay, the player character shivers and drops the ring, and then the player character picks up the ring again. And yeah, that's uh no. I think Magpie released a book with a solo Bluebeard's Bride adventure. Go play that
Ooh,
instead.
there you go. Awesome. I did not know that. That's really cool.
Yes, Book of Lore, I think, is a choose your own adventure using the mechanics of the game.
What else should we consider? Anything else you think should be thrown out there?
The session length, as we alluded to earlier. I find in my experience, shorter sessions are typically better for duets. The impression one can get from duet games, especially if you're like me and you love hogging that spotlight, is that now there's more space to focus on your character who is awesome and that's super exciting. You aren't considering how exhausting that's going to be. Short sessions can help the game feel fresh and give you the opportunity to make really great cliffhangers. It's going to make both sides, MC and player, run back to the table and play for more. The sweet spot for me tends to be between 1 to 2 hours. That's going to vary depending on you, your game partner, and any other commitments you have, obviously. Rich, we were talking earlier. Just remind the listeners, what session lengths work best for you?
For duet games, I've found ranging between 45 minutes to tapping out at about an hour and a half is like the most that I can really stay for. I'm just exhausted. It's fascinating. Like I run 3 hour games all the time online, but when it's just my wife and I in a duet game, it's intense. It's not necessarily emotionally intense as much as just emotionally engaging to the point where
Yeah.
I feel a little tired.
Yeah, and I find the short length also helps the flexibility for scheduling a lot. A great example I could think of was from our second Urban Shadows campaign, where Rob and I were sitting on our back deck and we had left on this really, really intense cliffhanger. And we were sitting back there, and Rob was like, "What if your character just died and he comes back to life like 4 days in the future?" Not invoking the Jesus thing, but what does the world look like 4 days in the future? And we sat out back for 30 minutes, kind of spitballing a little bit of world building. And then we were like, we're playing this right now. And then like ran back inside to our gaming room table and then played for an hour, like talking about this messed up situation that happened 4 days after the last cliffhanger. Oh, so good.
That is really neat. Wow, what a cool example.
So, what if it's just not you and your partner or your roommate who's playing role playing games? What if you have more than one person in your household who wants to game? That can work out too. You might have a bunch of roommates around your age who want to get involved in some Powered by the Apocalypse, try it out for the first time. Maybe there's a game on your shelf you all want to play.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Please consult all of our other episodes of Plus One Forward for information on how to do that. But what if you have kids?
What if you have kids?
I don't have kids.
I have kid. I have singular 14-year-old kid. Yeah.
Given the popularity of role playing games and pop culture right now, your kids may have heard of them through cultural osmosis. I remember tweeting there was one time where I was in the streetcar going to work, and there was these two kids who were very clearly discussing Monster of the Week, which they had found out about on a actual play podcast, and were describing it as what if masks, but it's a horror story instead.
That's
Kids know
great.
these things. As we established, I don't have children, so running for kids isn't something I have a lot of experience with. I was inspired to bring it up as a potential way to game in the pandemic because my friend, game writer Peter Van Heel, has been posting about the games he's playing with his children. I asked him for some general guidance, which I will share as follows. One, don't let the rules stand in the way of their experience, especially with younger kids. If your 8-year-old wants to be a tiger princess with a ring of invincibility, let them have it. Make up rules on the fly, make their setbacks interesting and funny. Take your cues on tone from your children.
Mm.
2, for older kids, treat them like peers. Hang up the parental hat for a while and hang out. And 3, always find out what they want to play. Don't make them play the game you want to play. Although he then added that he was playing some first edition 1970s role playing game for a while because one of his kids was listening to podcasts and watching actual plays on YouTube and had her mind blown by the idea that you could have randomized character generation. I believe he said she ended up playing an asthmatic ant person.
Wow.
The
Wow.
70s were weird.
That's amazing.
So you might have some flexibility in terms of guiding the game that comes to your table.
My wife and I, because we're both gamers, we press ganged my son in very young. She insisted, and I agreed that his first game should be D&D. So
Of
it
course.
was. right? We played basic D&D like White Box, and it was good. Over time, we've mixed in and out of games. The most recent thing we played was Tales from the Loop. That was really fun. Before that, though, we did have a pretty long running Dungeon World game, and that was our home game for a while. So much so that my son's wizard, Indifferent, one of his birthday presents was that I commissioned a professional artist to draw his character based off of all of his descriptions, and he still carries it around and puts it up in his room and everything. So he still loves that, but it's been a bit since we played it. Dungeon World is a really great game for kids versus most Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I'll say that specifically because I found in my experience that the level of collaboration and open-ended question and answers that I'm used to with the Powered by the Apocalypse game can be a little challenging for younger children. So, World of Dungeons, great fit. Dungeon World, good fit. Monster Hearts, probably don't want to play that with my kid. If you do, that's fine. Urban Shadows, there's just touchstones that he doesn't have. Monster of the Week, I think we could probably rock that. I just haven't actually brought it to the table. So the game selection I find is going to be a little slimmer for what works with kids, but there are options out there. Just be mindful that you can't really just play it like you would play it with an adult. You need to keep in mind there might be a little bit more guiding, a little less, hey, let's all make whatever world if you're talking about like early teens. But you're gaming with the kids, so keep your ears open. And I think that Peter's suggestions are pretty great.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you knew of any, or you could think of any Powered by the Apocalypse light games, but I think your suggestions of going to the ones that do lean into that fantasy role playing, the ones that are meant to appeal to gamers who are used to having more structured, would probably be a good transition into Powered by the Apocalypse.
Yep, yep. And I think Wodu is a great, Wodu being short for World of Dungeons. There are a number of hacks. Cat Raman's Rovers game, Offworlders, another good suggestion. Ghost Orbit, which you can find on Itch, World of Dungeons itself. Those are all games that just have a very few select number of moves. They have less pick lists. I found pick lists to be a real sticking point
Mm.
for my kid. Like, but I want them all, but you can have them all, which can be a good teaching moment. But still, at some point, like, I want the game to happen. Not here to teach. That just happens, right? Osmosis. But World of Dungeons, there's a lot more like 7 to 9. The GM tells you the mixed thing. 10 plus, you get what you want. It's very conventional in that style. So it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, but it does a really good job of bringing people in from the more conventional style of game.
Fantastic. So, Rich, what if you live on your own or everyone in your family is not so interested in playing role playing games or playing Powered by the Apocalypse? Where would you turn to next?
You turn online, you turn on your computer, and you connect yourself to the internet. Hopefully, you have access to that. And not everybody does. Not everybody is in a great internet capable. Not everyone actually has a space where they can game in quiet. So those are some things you need to keep in consideration if you've got a face-to-face group and you're trying to bring them online. But for the last 3 weeks, I've been running an Apocalypse World Second Edition game for a group that's never played online. I've also been chatting with Paul Beakley. He's been moving his group online and they've transitioned to play Impulse Drive. So we've been sharing some observations and I've given him a few tips and tricks because I've been running games online primarily for several years now. Powered by the Apocalypse is great for gaming over Zoom or StreamYard or Jitsi or Google Hangouts or Skype or even Roll20. There are pros and cons for all of those voice over IP, and there's probably a dozen more out there that I'm not aware of, but those are the main ones that I've heard people playing over. Here's some of my thoughts about online gaming for Powered by the Apocalypse. First of all, I call it fast mode. Powered by the Apocalypse, the moves are targeted towards conflict resolution rather than task resolution. So the handling time for an event like a combat or an extended action like a chase scene, that kind of stuff, is less than it is for more conventional games. Like you make a die roll and pick from a pick list and it's done. For Apocalypse World, it's a couple goes, but most of your NPCs are made out of tissue paper and go down kind of hard because it's less about the fight and it's more about the aftermath. At least that's what I have most enjoyed about Apocalypse World. So with those that less handling time, that's great because it allows for shorter sessions, which in my experience is a must for online video and voice gaming. I cap my games at 3 hours with a 5 to 10 minute break in the middle because sitting in front of a webcam and a computer screen for hours and hours without moving, because if you move, the camera doesn't pick you up, right?
Hmm.
That can really wear somebody out. Add on top of that that you're emoting and tracking stats and staring at tiny little people on the camera, right on your monitor. They're not that big, and you're trying to see, oh, did that hit? Is that person interested? Are they leaning forward? It's a very different experience than that face-to-face game when you're right there, you know. So that's a lot more taxing, and being present in an online game is I've found to be a little more wearing. So having a game that can run in fast mode is much easier than a game that has a lot of discrete task resolution and movement and map combat. That stuff can make it last forever. And it's better to keep your games at like the 2.5 to 3 hour.
As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, we've been playing Impulse Drive, and 3 hours seems to hit that sweet spot for us because that's the point where we're able to stay fully engaged. We're not distracted because it's very easy, I find, at least for me, to be distracted with online gaming. I have to turn off my smartphone and make sure I'm paying attention to the game, put aside all the work stuff for now. But I really do feel like with Powered by the Apocalypse, we have enough time to dive right in and have plot and story happen and feel like we've done something that's very rewarding and very fulfilling. And then again, like we were talking with the duet game, step away wanting more, which is what you want when you're running a campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. This is more of a gaming online. It's less specific to Powered by the Apocalypse, but it's one of my little soapboxes that I'm going to quickly go into, which is once you move to a game online, you need to get into the habit as a GM of calling on people by their player's name or their character's name, because it at a table you can say, "Okay, what do you guys do next?" And it works. It works consistently. People stare at each other. A couple people might talk through a thing and then there's side conversations, and that's just fine. But in online, that is the death knell for the next 2 minutes of actual something happening in your game, because you
Mm-hmm.
say, what do you guys do next? And then everyone stares trying to see, okay, well, who's going to go? Oh, well, I talked last time, so maybe I shouldn't talk right now. Wait, nobody's talking. I should say a thing. What am I going to say? You have this like pregnant pause of 30 seconds. Then invariably two people will talk at the same time. Then they will apologize to each other, and you get to see this no you go dance. No, you go. No, you go. No, it's all right, you went last time. And now 2 minutes have passed with nothing actually happening, and you've lost all of the thread of whatever tension was going on because you did not direct the conversation. You have to you can say X or Y if you really don't want to call on one particular person. But even then, you're asking for the no, you go dance. So that's my quick little soapbox. Call on people by name, save yourself the time. The other thing about Powered by the Apocalypse that I find works really well is part of that calling people on by name is cross-cutting and solo duo scenes. Meaning, if I've got 4 to 5 players in a game, I'm going to find a way to pair up 2 players and then either pair up 2 other players and have one person solo, or have 3 people and put them in different situations at a relatively equal timeline, and then cross cut back and forth between the two. Now, the great thing about Powered by the Apocalypse is that moves don't happen all the time, and they introduce a certain amount of interest and tension. So that's the great time to cut. You can no, because that's the part, right? Like, how much do I go before I cut back and forth? And you'll eventually find your own pacing. But when you're starting out, go up to the point of a move, let them roll their dice, cut away, go to the next person. And you can even do it like you're being nice. Like, I'm going to let you look over your options. I'm going to bounce over here. Okay, cool. And then bam, you jump and you do that quick 5 seconds of you guys were blah, blah, blah. You're doing so. You set up that scene and then you roll with that until you get to that moment of tension. Somebody rolls some dice. Boom, you cut back. You've resolved that die roll. Now, it means you have to remember it. You have to remember what the hell they just rolled a good 5, 6, 7 minutes ago. So you may want to write yourself a note. But if you screw it up, just say, okay, how did that die roll come out? What options do you choose? And it's my, if anybody who knows me, they know that Rich has forgotten what was happening in the last scene. So as the person describes, oh, I chose to ask these questions, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's what's going on. And then you just bounce back and forth between those groups. Sometimes you'll have them meet up and split up into different pairings and the like so that they have more options to chat with each other and engage and have that kind of stuff. So that's a good way to run with multiple players, because if you're not going to be able to crosscut, you're not comfortable with that, I recommend 3 players max. That way everybody can be moving around together in the same kind of scenes without having to worry about the talking over each other problem.
To pull from examples from the current online game we're playing together, you've been using those techniques to make very cinematic scenes where characters either air their grievances with each other or release tension with each other. That is on point for it to be a Star Wars game. That you wouldn't be getting that payoff if you weren't managing the scenes and managing how many people were interacting in the scene at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. It would get lost in the shuffle, or someone would distract with this tangent, and then they go off on whatever tangent, and you lose the drama of the scene. In fact, I think that developing this skill set, now that you're kind of forced to online, is definitely something you can take back to the face-to-face table, because it works there too. It works real well, and it's my preferred way to play. But get to be on all the time anyway. So I've also found that my groups that I run in that style for like it a lot too. They are willing to give up 5 to 10 minutes of being quote unquote on stage in order to play audience to that, and then they get their spotlight. Versus the we're all together and whoever talks loudest is the person who makes our decisions, which is the way I've seen some groups function in my life of playing games for decades now. And I find that to be the less optimal way for folks to play. Another thing that I like about Powered by the Apocalypse in an online game is you can record your sessions, and you may not want to make it public because according to Rach, you're going to get yelled at. She's not wrong. Recording those sessions are better than notes. And you have the ability to do that. And I also do it in my face-to-face game. I would just put my phone in the middle of the table and record that audio because it's just super helpful. Yeah, here's the other thing that's kind of fun when you're playing Apocalypse World, and I know this from actual experience. Maybe you do a little dress up, right? You don't have to travel to somebody's house looking like a goofball. I remember when the first full Apocalypse World session happened, Wayne, one of the players, like had face paint on. He had this awesome scarf and these cool goggles. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm so happy right now. And then this week he was wearing like a fake mohawk. This is insane. This is the best. I feel like I'm on like Critical Role or something, that I've got a player who's so into it that he's doing that kind of thing. And I have had a lot of fun enjoying that.
Okay, now I know what I need to do for like a couple Mondays in the future. I have to go find my mirror shades again.
Yes, mirror shades, do it. What about you? Any thoughts about gaming over voice over IP video conference stuff?
Something you didn't bring up is some streaming software allows you to change the names of all of the different members of the call. So in the Star Wars game, Rich has us change all our names to the names of our characters. So when you're looking at all the different people in the call, you don't go, oh, that's Rob or that's Rich or that's Chris. It's these are the characters they're playing instead. And it drives home addressing people by their character names and not
Mm-hmm.
their actual names.
Good call.
The final thing to bring up in the context of dressing up, something we've been doing on Zoom, with the exception of me, because I don't really have a great room for it, is all the other players change their backgrounds.
Yes.
And it's ridiculous.
It's so fun. I own it. I own it, and it's great, and I love it. And yeah, I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea, and I try not to get anything that's annoying in the background, but I'm
so
really
jealous.
enjoy it.
Also use this trick for entertainment during family calls in this pandemic. Children love it.
I'm sure. Well, hey, let's jump over here and talk about a couple of other ways to game online. Not everything has to be video and voice.
You did bring up certain people, and I know people who don't have internet that is powerful enough to handle video chat. What are some other options for them?
One of the ways, tried and true, has been a way to play role playing games since letter writing, play by post. There's been a previous episode, if you check out the Plus One Forward episode for The Warren, Marshall Miller and I talked a lot about Powered by the Apocalypse games via play by post. But I'll just say, of all the games that I've played over play by post, and by play by post, I mean in a forum style, Tavern Keeper, the website is my favorite place to play by post games. What's nice about Powered by the Apocalypse is, again, that fast play, and also the moves, if the custom moves are written well enough, and then the basic moves of almost all the Powered by the Apocalypse games I play, the triggers are written very well so that a player can say, I have just done this trigger. I know that I need to engage this move, or I am going to specifically craft my text to have my character trigger this move. And then you can go ahead and roll it, right? So it lowers that handling time of the back and forth. That's one of the things that I find causes a play by post game to die, is that long wait between player puts up their paragraph to novella sized post. Now they have to wait for the GM to come and adjudicate a thing. And then the GM says, go ahead and roll. Then you go wait a half day to day. Player rolls dice. Now GM has to roll reaction dice. And by that point, 3 days have gone by and you haven't even made it down the corridor. But in Powered by the Apocalypse, oh, I'm going to trigger this thing. I'm going to roll the dice. I've got a pick list of options. Here's my choices. Okay, MC just sees all those things, reacts to it, moves the plot along. It works great. I love Powered by the Apocalypse for play by post. Works really, really well.
So you talked about the downtime that can occur with play by post, where it takes 3 days or so for someone to reply. Do you think, with there being a break between people who are working from home who do have access to forums during the day versus people who, like myself, I don't have access to a computer for personal use during my working hours, is there space to accommodate both groups of people in the same game? People who could post frequently during working hours versus people who can't?
Absolutely. A couple things that I do to cure for that. Number one, similar to the cross cutting with live games, if I have a person who's more of a, like, I can only post between these certain hours, then I try not to pair them up with a turbo poster who's home all day and can post any time of the day, night, week, weekend. And there are folks like that. I happen to be one of them, so I don't say that with any level of scrutiny. And so I try to keep the folks that can only post between X or Y time away from the turbo posters as much as possible, that as long as the fiction still makes sense for it. I try to make myself available for response posts during the time that I know that those folks who are working during the day will be on and post it. I know Rach doesn't get back till 8 o'clock. I want to have my eyes towards that forum or wherever we're playing the play by post around that time frame so that I can bounce a post back to them. The other thing that I do that I think is really critical is I throttle the amount of plot that moves. Meaning, for a turbo poster, they could have a lengthy conversation of back and forth with several NPCs, jokes, side tangents, lots of description, something to make it nice and full. It's almost like badminton. Like, we're going to bop, 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 and we'll do a few knocks back and forth. For the person that has to go into work and doesn't have access to it, I'm going to try to queue up something that moves their plot forward a little bit more quickly. The conversations might be a little more terse, or I might write more in one. Like, I might say a couple of different things that the NPC says and does so that it's meatier, not a thing coming from the sky, but more meat on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, everybody gets something out of it, and I can still generally progress the timeline near to the same so that at any point when Rachel's character jumps into another scene, they're not like 3 days ahead of them, that kind of thing.
What if you have players who are looking for something a little bit quicker than a play-by-post? What online options are there for them?
So for the folks that either aren't interested in gaming over video and voice or play by post, they just have a bad taste in their mouth. There is lots of people have different names for it, but what I call is RP by chat. So this goes back to the IRC days. So it's a little bit more of an immediate type of situation where you're posting in a chat. Either it started out in IRC, but I see tons of it right now over Discord. I'm just now laying the groundwork to kick off a game playing by Slack, not because I like Slack more than Discord, more so that Discord is blocked by my work firewall. And if I want this game to survive the end of social distancing, I'll need to be able to continue it via Slack. RP by chat is interesting because the expectation for the post rate is higher, but the post length is significantly lower. Meaning, I've found in play by post, a lot of people think, oh, I need to write a couple, 3, 4 paragraphs worth of content because I'm only going to get 5, 6 posts out of this. But when you're gaming over Discord, you got your phone, and you could be standing in line at the grocery store and bop out a quick response to something in an RP by chat over Discord. That's not an expectation you'd normally have for a play by post, but RP by chat or play by chat, that's absolutely a thing that's completely legitimate. So it's a much speedier style of game, and people play it whenever because everybody has their smartphones with them, quote unquote, everybody, but a lot of people do. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been my general experience. Is this similar to a play by post, but there's just more of a ubiquitous level of access to the posting ability and a similarly much lower amount of actual posts. Like, they're just gonna put out a sentence or two, and there's no spell checker. So I've found that a lot of times there's poor spelling you just got to look past, but it's okay. I mean, not everybody's the child of two teachers, and they can get over it.
When I used to role play Freeform online, I did a combination of play by post and on AOL Messenger. Although hilariously, looking back at really old play by post storylines from about, a decade ago, I was reminded of there being a couple of oddball times where we did do gaming over chat and then use that to make the play by post, and it was like an epic novel at that point and ridiculous. But to go back to what I was thinking, I found gaming by chat usually inspired more casual conversation between the characters where play by post didn't. Play by post always felt more, again, we weren't using Powered by the Apocalypse, but felt more like collaborative writing, while gaming over chat was a little bit more free-formed and abstract in that way.
That's a really solid observation. That's been my experience as well. That's really cool.
Which inspires me to kind of go looking for Powered by the Apocalypse games on Discord, because I like that. I love the idea of like, yeah, you're just hanging out in line at the grocery store or commuting on, well, transit, I would presume, and you could just fire off a quick reply. Done.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really great.
So my final question, would you go to play by post in the actual sense of the word post where you're mailing things?
No, my handwriting sucks, Rach.
Old school, true social distancing. So, Rich, thank you for expanding my horizons and reminding me of my ill-gotten late teens role-playing freeform online and making me consider that I could start role-playing Powered by the Apocalypse online, and now nothing can stop me.
Nothing can stop you. Rach, thanks for sharing your stories. I crave to read this novel that you have written in freeform RP over AOL.
No,
That sounds
no.
wonderful.
So embarrassing. Let's not talk about this again.
Well, thanks again, Rach. This has been great getting back on the mics with you, and stay safe, okay?
Yeah, stay safe as well. Keep as safe as you possibly can right now.
Absolutely. And listeners, thanks for giving us an ear. And if you've got some comments or feedback, feel free to share that with us.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.
Hi listeners, there has never been a better time to get into online role-playing games than right now, and the Gauntlet is one of the best places to give it a shot. We've been organizing and running hundreds of game sessions each year since 2015, and we're always happy to welcome new players. Today I want to talk about two things, Gauntlet Hangouts and Gauntlet Community Open Gaming. Gauntlet Hangouts is our regular weekly game schedule where players and game runners come together to run the best indie tabletop role-playing games around. Right now, we have a limited number of $10 spots available on our Patreon. These $10 spots are the best way to get involved with Gauntlet Hangouts because they give you RSVP priority for new Gauntlet Hangouts game sessions. These $10 spots also come with the regular benefits of Gauntlet membership, the Codex magazine, access to our Slack group, and you help keep podcasts like this one going. But you need to act fast. There are only 35 of these $10 spots available for calendar year 2020. The other thing I want to talk about is Gauntlet Community Open Gaming. Gauntlet Community Open Gaming is a special weekend of gaming we have put together to help support folks who are trapped in the house because of coronavirus. The first Gauntlet Community Open Gaming weekend is April 16th through April 19th. This special event is completely free, anyone can join up and play, and features an amazing lineup of games from Hearts of Wulin to Trophy to Pasión de las Pasiones and much more. To learn more about Gauntlet Hangouts and Gauntlet Community Open Gaming, head over to our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. Thanks.